Guys, live special edition. We are launching the Ndi November Webinar Series. Now, this is something we got together with NewTek and all our partners, and we're going to be doing special shows kicking off with a great kickoff speaker, Dr. Cross. I'm going to bring in live momentarily, but we are going to have guests from BirdDog, Panasonic, Telestream, Epiphan, NewTek again, and PTZOptics. We're doing a giveaway tied to it. Go to our website and look for it, but this is Ndi November. Now, guys, you know, in this whole pandemic world, we kind of forgot a very important milestone, and that was 5 years ago, Ndi was launched to the world. It was back in April of 2016, so 4 years. Ndi is the real deal. It's gone and exploded. Normally, we would have had an IBC show sometime in October where we would have talked about all the cool Ndi stuff, but there was no IBC show. But we feel that Ndi is so important to our industry and what it has brought to us that we're bringing in the godfather, the inventor of Ndi, Dr. Cross, on the show momentarily. But more importantly than that, we wanted to really talk about how the Ndi world has grown and how Ndi now is not just powering live video production, it's gone beyond that. It's becoming part of the AV world, kind of the conferencing world. You know, with the pandemic, video and live streaming has become such a key element of communication for houses of worship, education, corporate video, and even, you know, whatever sports can be played. So we're going to come into the show today with Dr. Cross. So guys, let's bring him in if we can. Hey Andrew, thanks for that, holding on a little bit for us.
Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here.
Awesome. We love having you on the show. You've been a frequent guest, and in fact, I would say our shows together probably have over 100,000 combined views. So you are by far and away the most popular guest on Video Guys Live.
Oh dear. I don't know if that's good or bad.
I think it's wonderful, and I think one of the things that I really wanted to do with the show today was I wanted to start with a little bit of a history lesson, if we could. So guys, let's bring up that special sidebar we have that we have going here. And you know, Ndi is something that has been around for a while, and right here you can see the layout of the show. So I want to run through that first. We're going to go into Ndi history, a little bit about Ndi HX2, Ndi 4.5, talk about some partners, talk about the cloud and how it relates to remote production, which is so important now in this pandemic world. And then an Ndi future. I want to talk about not just where you see Ndi going in the pro video space, but how it's taken a sharp turn to supporting the AV space also. But with Ndi history, if we're going to start with Ndi, we got to start from the beginning. And the beginning for me was a very fond moment that I brought up on shows before, but that was, I was at an NAB show, 2015. NewTek was having their partner event on that Sunday. It was a little cocktail hour. Me and you sat down, we were having a beer, and you said, you know, what did you think will be the most important things of the show? What are you looking for? So I said, I'm looking at 4K and IP. I'm not sure which will be which. And you said, well, you're half right and you're half wrong. And you proceeded to get out a cocktail table and start drawing and explain to me how IP was what was going to make 4K viable. And that without IP, 4K was going to stall on itself because of infrastructure issues. And lo and behold, not only were you right, of course, but I didn't realize that you had this whole thing cooked, and come IBC, it would be released to the world. But I can remember when my sales manager over at NewTek was starting to explain this whole thing to me, I was like, okay, time out. I hate to burst your bubble, but Dr. Cross kind of went in detail with me 4 months ago, only I didn't realize, you know, where he was. So let's talk about those early days, Ndi, how you actually, what brought you to have it come about? Because it really was a spin-off of some other technologies you had more into what made you make it open, and how crazy was it just to get Ndi off the ground initially?
Well, okay, so you know, before Ndi, what we had was you know, AirSend. So we had a kind of, if you had a TriCaster SD, we had the ability to send video over the network to a TriCaster SD. And actually, the funny story is that the reason we did this is that when we were making that product, we went out and talked to potential users, and they were all saying, you just need to be able to bring a laptop into your show. And we had no technological way at that moment in time to digitize VGA signals. And so we couldn't build the product the customers were saying we needed. So we came up with this crazy idea. Well, let's try doing it over the network and capturing the desktop, and sending it over IP. So that's how AirSend was born back in the very first days of TriCaster SD.
Right.
And over the years, we then made it an SDK, but we gave it to a few key partners, of which actually the first one was Vizrt, which is funny to look at here, 10 years later. And so, we developed this, we worked with Carl, and we worked with a whole bunch more, and we had this, we all of them had the ability to send TriCasters, video over the network. Then, about 5 or 6 years ago, I think it became, very clear that IP was going to be the future. And to us as a company, we've always bet our whole company out, everything we do on the fact that ultimately video is going to be done with computers. It's going to be done by software, and networking, it is the natural language of software. And so, to us, this was obviously a wonderful thing. And so what we decided to do was to take what we'd done and release it to the world, to everybody. And, it was rebranded as NDI back then. At that moment, and that is how NDI came about. And a lot of people kind of say, well, how, what was the great thing about NDI? What was the real innovation here? And quite honestly, the real innovation was actually doing it, because we're just a small company in Texas. So to kind of have to go out and take what we did and give it to the world and turn it into what it's now become is the thing that I'm the most proud of. The technology is almost second to that. So, that's how it happened.
That's really great. And one of the things I think that's important is you said you did it and it's here. And that's really important. We're going to go through and show we're up to 4.5 on this. While the larger, broader bodies are still stumbling over really their 1.0 IP introductions, and it's great that it's there. Now, before we go any further, just because some people, this might be their first time seeing a show about NDI, give us a quick elevator pitch, 1-2 minute. What is NDI? What's the magic of it?
Okay. Here's what I would say. So if I looked around at IP, look, video is largely created by lots of devices put together to make a show. And you connect those devices through different means. If it could be HDMI, it could be SDI, or it could be IP. In the IP world, what I always like to say is that something like 2110 is what happens when a hardware engineer looks at a network cable and thinks, how do I move video over this? No, but that's not criticism. That's it's just that, when you're coming from a hardware-centric view, you would create a 2110. NDI is what happens when a software engineer looks at an IP cable and says, look, how do I move video around on the network using software, and how do I make it easy for software vendors? And that is what NDI is. So, if you want, NDI is the HDMI cable for sharing video, but, if you believe that software is the future. And that is what has driven it since day one. And so, making it easy, making it so it can all be done in software, so it can run on kind of any machine, can work on the networks that you already have. Those were the key things, and those were what drove NDI, and making it, easy and fun to play with were number two, because we had to enjoy ourselves doing it.
And what's funny is I think you're right. The engineers were just thinking, how do I replace this HDMI cable? How do I replace this SDI cable? They weren't seeing past their physical realm of what they were working on, where you were looking at it and say, how can I deliver comms? How can I deliver PTZ control? How can I have a two-way transfer of data that's not video, but is an important element of the production? So NDI isn't just video going over the network, it's all that other stuff that makes a high-level production like this possible. Like right now, if I turn this way, guys, if we want to cut to it, this is your NDI HX camera that we have coming in NDI into our TriCaster TC1. If we go back, we're bringing in, this is your first example of how NDI worked. We're using, it was scan converter. It's the NDI, to come in, if you NDI from the laptop to bring the show, and it's all getting combined into the TriCaster TC1. And then we've got you coming in on Talk Show, which we'll talk more about Skype and stuff like that a little bit later in the show. But let's jump to now what I'll call those middle years, where we put it out there, and now we had to make it work a lot better, because people were really, I think, adopting it faster than even you imagined. So we had some real world user feedback that was bombarding us in those next couple of years. Let's talk about like 2.0 and 3.0. What came about then?
Yeah, so this is clearly true. I mean, I think we released it and we felt pretty good in those you know, the first launch. It was launched at IBC. You're completely right, and we felt pretty good about it, and we were happy, and we got a lot of interest, and you know, it seemed to be going well. And somewhere there in the next, you know, I would say 2 years, somehow it suddenly, we looked at it and like, whoa, what just happened? Because it went from where we personally know every company working with it to the point that you're kind of walking around and going, oh, crap, I never knew these guys were using NDI in it. And suddenly you no longer understand, you know, like it went from being, okay, we see how big it is, to becoming like, okay, you know, just it's getting used everywhere. We hardly can keep track of it anymore. And, you know, that did happen, you know, about what you're saying in kind of the NDI 2 and 3 timeframe. And, you know, and that was remarkable and surprising. And, you know, certainly I don't think I can say that we anticipated that. You know, I'm very excited that happened, because at the end of the day, I think it just confirms that our whole philosophy, if it's going to be about the software and it's going to be about what you can do on computers, on the networks you have today, and if we make this easy, suddenly there's lots more people in the world who can be doing video. That's always been our mission, and it kind of confirmed that, which feels, you know, really good.
And when we talk about making it easy and living it to everyone, I think that's where 3.0 really took off, because that's where you introduced the NDI HX and the PTZ support. You kind of wrapped H.264 into this whole thing. So talk about a little bit about that whole world, how HX came about.
Yeah, so HX actually is unbelievably important, and you know, it is funny that in many ways HX is you know, probably as important as the launch of NDI. And the reason for that, so the first version of HX came about because we were sitting with our you know, partners at PTZOptics and at Panasonic. And, you know, the problem when you're a hardware vendor is that hardware takes years and years to develop. You know, I mean, you're normally talking a 5-year window. And, you know, so what we did is we sat down and were you know, if you will, kind of blue sky thinking about how on earth can we make the cameras that exist today work over IP. Because if we could do that, it would suddenly take the whole industry a jump forwards 5 years into the future. And you know, between us, we actually worked out how we could take that what they had, which was relatively limited IP support at those days, and actually, because NDI was something that we fully write the SDK for, we could wrap it up enough that it looked and worked exactly like a regular NDI source. And that is what NDI HX1 was, and that is what allowed the Panasonic and PTZOptics cameras that were already in the market suddenly become IP enabled, which was never part of the thinking when those cameras had been designed. And so this, you know, at a market level was actually a huge jump forwards, because suddenly we went from IP being this future thing. It was great for software. Hey, all the software apps could talk, but it suddenly became something in which there were hundreds of thousands of cameras that people already had and which were already being sold that suddenly could do IP. You know, so what would have to the industry normally taken about 5 years to happened, you know, very, very quickly because of NDI HX. And so if anything, it was HX that accelerated the move towards IP across the industry faster than anything else, you know, has, including the original NDI launch, because the original NDI was obviously great for software, but it was when suddenly all these cameras that were already out there and people already had could do NDI that you know, suddenly it became far more real. And so HX was incredibly important. And
the most amazing thing is it allowed software thinking versus hardware thinking. You could flash the firmware and enable NDI HX on so many cameras that were out there. Now, older ones, no, but the cameras that were all the recent cameras pretty much now, since HX came out, every PTZ camera that's been introduced has had the ability to have HX if they're willing to work with you guys and do the licensing fee. And I know, you know, we've had some talks, but you've told me that the amount of, if you can share just numbers, not dollars, how many NDI HX licenses for PTZ cameras? Now, this means someone didn't buy a camera with it, but they're retrofitting a camera they already had. Are downloaded from this year from the NewTek website. I hate to put you on the spot.
Well, I'm afraid I don't know the exact number. I don't. It is actually grown phenomenally. And I can say, you know, we're just ending Q3, and I can say that you know, when I look back at the numbers, and I just don't remember what the total number is, but when I look at the numbers, well, here's a real number for you. Q3 2020 is up 500% from Q3 2019.
500%.
Yeah, 500%. So that is last quarter year-on-year growth, which is obviously completely staggering.
Yep.
I think that you know, so there's an asterisk beside this number, but about 1 in every 4 PTZ cameras sold in the world supports NDI at this point. You know, you might think, well, gosh, only 1 in 4, but think that the vast majority are getting sold into existing installations, you know, and are still being used over SDI. But you know, it's probably no exaggeration to say that, you know, probably 90% of all IP being done on you know, PTZ cameras that is being done for production use is NDI now. So, you know, clearly NDI has become a huge factor in PTZ cameras.
Cool. Now let's talk about how that explosion of NDI helped fuel an explosive moment in NewTek's history, and that was we're at NAB 2019 and everything gets scrapped to be redone because a big orange company comes in and says, we want you, and you guys get purchased by Vizrt. You set Vizrt, NewTek, and NDI kind of as its own group division based on, you know, the revenues it's obviously producing, but that had to be an incredible, proud moment for you, Dr. Cross. Talk about what that was for you, you know, to have that happen. You know, Vizrt is a highly respected broadcast monster in our industry, and they came in from the sports graphics and they said, we want you, and it's been a great partnership since. But talk about those early days.
Well, you know, so to me, honestly, you know, when it was announced, well, here's actually I'll give you kind of an interesting anecdotal story about the announcement, which is, you know, so first of all, the announcement to me was like, it was almost nothing because I'd been working on this and I'd been working with Vizrt for well over a year before this. And so, you know, this was the culmination of a lot of work. And we had been, you know, and I had been very close to Vizrt for years and years. In fact, when we made the first true IP switches, I actually went to the co-founder of Vizrt, who was a close friend of mine, called Peter, and I actually described to him what I was thinking to get his view on the whole concept of what became VMC1, which was our first kind of all IP bigger switcher. You know, so we have been very close with Vizrt for years and years, and so you know, in some ways it was a very happy, you know, event to have made this happen. But you know, in terms of the announcement, it's funny because I think it was a Tuesday. I knew it was going to be announced on Wednesday, but the deal had got signed on a Tuesday, and so me and a couple of the people I was actually quite close with at the company went out for celebratory tacos. There's this taco place right by NewTek that we go to, and we went out for celebratory tacos, and we were sitting there talking, and somehow it got leaked while we were at lunch, like publicly, that Vizrt were going to buy NewTek. So suddenly our phones just started like text after text after text. So I remember that quite well. And then, you know, it was announced through the press, you know, well, through the press release and at NAB right after that. But, you know, it was very good. And I think that, you know, we have this history going back so long with Vizrt. We are companies that have both built our you know, future on, you know, our whole companies on software, on, you know, computers. You know, it's just such a perfect mix. And if you think about it, we're probably the only company in the whole market now that have products that reach right the way down to what are used at high school by kids, right the way up to the top tier of broadcasting. And, you know, having that range of, you know, customers from the bottom right the way up to the absolute top, is remarkable, and there's probably nobody like us, and I feel very proud of what we've accomplished. And quite honestly, it's a match that's really been made in heaven, you know. I think really.
And for you as an inventor and an engineer, a scientist, someone who likes, you know, developing new stuff, the amount of resources for you exploded, right? Your engineers went from, you know, a solid handful, not a small amount, to a much more larger amount that's now globally, you know. Talk about that a little bit, because I think that really speaks to where the resources behind the future of NDI are.
Yes, I mean, I think that feels a little bit overwhelming, and it certainly changed, at least for me, because, you know, when you have a very close-knit team like we have in San Antonio, that I think are just unbelievable engineers, and I just, you know, it's just been such an honor to work with them, and what we've pulled off, you know, with our small team, you know, for the industry has just been remarkable, because it's not just NDI, but when you think about, you know, TriCaster, 3Play, all of these things sort of really set the direction. Look, integrated live production. So the idea of integrating all of the pieces of production system is something NewTek, you know, created. I mean, and TriCaster really was set the direction. And when you think about it, this is what has enabled online live TV today, which is now a you know, billions and billions dollar industry. You know, the fact that Twitch exists, the fact that YouTube Live, the fact that Facebook Live exists, largely come back to what the team of people in San Antonio created. And obviously it's been taken on. There's lots of other products and lots of other companies now, but the innovation happened, you know, with what we created. And then, you know, we've done the same again with NDI. So I feel unbelievably, you know, proud of what that team have done. It's just, you know, it's been just.
You guys took IP video off the drawing board and put it in the studio. You actually made it happen. I think that's just tremendous. I want to keep this going now. Let's talk about NDI 4, which was another big flashpoint of some really exciting stuff. You got HDR support in there, NDI X2. Talk about, you know, what came about in 4, and talk a little about NDI HX2, because I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize how important that is.
It is, and it's unfortunate. I wish we could have found, you know, maybe, and this is probably a fault of mine, I wish we could have found a better way to maybe describe it. But as I said just a few minutes ago, what happened with HX1 is we sat down with, you know, the key camera vendors, and we worked out how to make, but basically what in effect was an incredible hack to make all of the cameras in the market work with NDI. But it was a hack, and it was not extensible so that others could develop against it. So what we did with HX2 was to fix these problems and say, look, you know, we see what pieces of hardware are typically in PTZ cameras today. How can we make it so that NDI can natively support them? And that is what HX2 is. So if you will, HX2 is true NDI version of HX1. And it has all the benefits of NDI. So a lot of the things like groups, automatic discovery servers, all can work with HX2. And, you know, this is very important. Now, when you tie to this, and this is, you know, key to all of this, is that in many ways, for a large part of the world, you know, the computer of the future is really going to be mobile devices. And certainly in cameras, and I'm not talking necessarily broadcast cameras, but if you think about the whole space of video, cameras are going to be driven by what is being done in cell phones as much as anywhere else. And so it's, you know, for something to be a true IP standard that is going to work for everybody, that plays into our desire to transform the way people are doing video, it needs to support mobile. And to do this, you need lower bandwidths and you need to support Wi-Fi. And, you know, this is why HX2 inside NDI version 4 was so important. And, you know, we tried to show that with the creation of, you know, our own iOS, iOS applications, but you know, looking forwards and thinking where video and IP go, obviously mobile is going to be a huge part of it, and we needed to start setting the place for you know, NDI to fully support that, which is why HX2 just also completely plays into that, as does the other things we did in NDI 4 that make it mobile ready.
Now, one of the things in HX2 that hasn't gotten a lot of press, because I think it's a little ahead of the curve, is we're going to have MPEG 5 HVAC support, correct?
Yes. So yes, we actually, so the NewTek you know, UHD camera supports HEVC over NDI already. Yes.
Cool. Now let's. No, go. I'm sorry.
You know, which is a big win, because that gives you, you know, twice as, you know, at the same bit rate, you get basically, you get twice the image quality. So it is a huge improvement, and we've got to be one of the first people to truly be there. And so we are on the forefront of currently what's possible over IP video in lots of ways.
And how I look at that is NDI has become so popular that one of the calls we get from people always is they're overwhelming their bandwidth. And now what we've basically done with that is we allow everyone to double their bandwidth when we go to the HVAC. So very cool. Let's talk about version 4.5. Came out this March. You released it just as the world was shutting down. So we didn't have a whole lot of fanfare for it, but it's still out there. And one of the things that I saw that a lot of people liked was that you really got that latency down where NDI HX versus what they call full NDI, the latency it's an imaginary issue at this point, really, correct?
It actually is, and I'll give you kind of a sneak preview of something that's coming here very soon that will illustrate this better than anything else. So we're actually about to release a new version of NDI tools here in let's say in the next 2 weeks that includes a version of Scan Converter that actually does full HX capture. So it uses full on GPU acceleration to do the entire NDI pipeline. And we did this in collaboration with our friends at NVIDIA, who actually announced it at GTC 2 or 3 weeks ago. But that's going to ship in the next 2 weeks. And when you do that, you're going to see just how low the latency of HX can be. And quite honestly, at this point, HX can be as low latency as NDI. There's nothing implicitly in the NDI part that stops it from being so. Obviously, when you're using camera, often there's a lot of other processing going on the camera, so you might end up with a bit of latency there. But the NDI part is incredibly low now. The latency on the NDI part
it's
is
so
very
amazing
low.
that you mentioned NVIDIA there, because I know that there is just a whole world of esports that's just ready to jump on NDI. They always find the reason why they can't. Little by little, you're knocking off all those no's, and I think that whole esports production is about to fall, by a factor of 3 or 4, getting more affordable because of NDI workflows.
Yes, and NDI is used very widely in e-gaming. But I can say that this new tool that we're putting out with an NVIDIA card can do, it can capture a 4K monitor at 60 hertz with 0% CPU usage and send it over to your network to an OBS or XSplit system that you're doing the streaming with, and have no impact on your game performance. So, there's definitely big advances that we're making there.
Cool. Now, the next section is going to be about partners. Now, clearly, NVIDIA and Microsoft, they're partners on a vendor developmental level. I want to talk about the partners who are, making the products that go with this NDI. I'm going to call it a universe, because it's not even fair to call let's call it the NDI universe. Panasonic you spoke about early on, they've got switches, mixers, they're all in. The BirdDog guys have taken a little bit different approach. They're developing hardware, to do the NDI. You got PTZOptics, you mentioned before. I can only tell you how much our business exploded with those guys, but I'm sure that's why you're up 500% also. Then we have Telestream with Wirecast. They really started slowly, but they are all in on NDI now. And then you got Epiphan Video, who really makes appliances. They're going NDI, and New Blue. And I don't want to forget some of the other people like vMix and OBS, the software people. That was a natural. So let's start talking about some of these guys. But I want to, the partner thing, rather than just going through the partners themselves, I thought let's talk about the categories the partners are in. So the first category you started mentioning is NDI cameras. So I don't want you to talk about any specific partner, but talk about where you see the partner world going in the future. Like I saw this year was the birth of ePTZ was a big thing, where you could have a fixed camera and now you could carve out an HD image from a 4K image. You've had virtual PTZ, different people call it different stuff. Where do you think over the next year we're going to see NDI cameras going?
Oh boy. So I think you're clearly going to see more of them, and I think that they are, you're going to increasingly see NDI HX2 support, which is important because it allows them to work with things like discovery servers, to work with local and remote IP addresses more cleanly. But I've got to say, and I can't talk about this yet, that I think there's some revolutions coming in this space that we're working on with a lot of these vendors that are going to have a huge impact, I hope. complete game-changing impact. But I'm not quite ready to talk about them quite yet. But I can see.
I get it. I know. I don't want you to say anything that's going to get you in trouble now that, you know, in general. And I know.
Oh, I get myself.
I know you're doing it all pretty well on your own. But the one thing I wanted to talk about is how quickly these guys have gone to 4K. And I don't think any of them ever dreamed they'd be in the 4K space. But NDI makes 4K doable for a PTZ camera.
It does, and I think that personally, I think that there are clearly 4K cameras out there, and I think that they're very good, including, NewTek have cameras there.
Yep.
But I think that that's still, I think that 1080p resolution is still kind of the sweet spot for many people. So I wouldn't underplay that, and I think our goal is to serve everybody in all uses. But I think you are right. The fact that we with NDI are talking about 4K PTZ IP cameras is actually quite remarkable when you look at the rest of the industry, say with 2110 and so on, which are having a real struggle getting to 4K at all, let alone affordable PTZ cameras. And I think that that's one of the revolutions that us and our partners have helped make happen in and accessible to people where it's not currently accessible, to high-end broadcast, ironically.
And if we're going to talk about NDI cameras, I guess I'm remiss. We're turning every smartphone into an NDI camera through applications as well. So this is just going to go to a whole nother level when, I can picture where someone could be in the audience and you could actually bring them in with their phone to be a part of the show. Now, it's a jump of courage to allow a producer to do that, but everyone's got a smartphone, and any smartphone can become part of the show now.
Yes. And I think smartphones play an important place. And actually, you want an impressive number, which is, we have our iOS app that does NDI, and it is in the, I think, cameras and something section on the App Store.
Apple Store, yeah.
And there's been times this year where it's been in the top 10 most popular apps in the whole App Store for cameras.
Amazing.
Which is actually quite remarkable. I mean, don't think we weren't surprised too.
Next, I want to talk about converters. And you guys have your Spark and Connect line. BirdDog has their converters. You have Majorel and KiloView. But I don't just want to talk about converters as being encoders. I think the biggest thing that's come now is decode as well. So just talk about the world of converters and where you see that going. I mean, BirdDog's got a quad converter at an incredible price. I think that's just the beginning of what we're going to see.
Yeah, I mean, clearly the converters have come a long way, and quite frankly, so companies even like NewTek, we focused first on encoders, not decoders, and we did that. We did that certainly because we primarily make video switches, and you tend to have more inputs to them than you have outputs, and so that was important to us. But I think that it, quite frankly, it took us all too long to get to decoders, and my head is off to BirdDog, who were the first people with a decoder, and they did it completely on their own. I mean, it was remarkable what they pulled off. My head is off to them for that. But I think now decoders have become, far more accessible and available, and that does change a lot. So now you're already starting to see people who are creating big NDI environments and are not even in the production space, just because it is a great way to move video around on existing networks, whether that is in a government facility or a school or company. And so having both encoders and decoders clearly has made a big difference.
And Dr. Cross, 10 years ago, Video Guys was really in the business of helping people with Adobe and Avid and nonlinear editing type workflows. And I think decoders open up a world in post-production where I could be an editor and anyone in my facility can watch the program that I'm working on. And when I'm shooting, right now, instead of having to use really expensive point-to-point, RF type decode stuff, I could use an NDI environment in a studio. And all of a sudden, I can really open up stuff where it is. But I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, because one of the requests I've gotten that people in that world really want is they say they need some kind of authorization limiting administrative rights. They don't want everyone to be, one of the cool things about NDI is it sees everything and everyone sees everything. And what the people in that world want to be able to say is, okay, I'm okay with the director seeing it upstairs, but I don't want it to be able to be playable by the guy who's in, Edit Suite C.
Yes. So you can actually do that. You can do that using NDI groups, and they do this quite well. And I can say that we are also looking at the next version of NDI of making this more, this more accessible, so it's easier to work out how to do this. It is interesting that you brought up the NLE aspect of this, and I unfortunately can't name names just because they're big companies we work with, and but I can say that probably. We're getting to the point where 50%, give or take, of all the NLE being done at TV stations in the US, certainly this year, is now being done, with NDI as output. So as they've moved to the cloud largely this year, so that their NLE users can work from home, almost all the stations have moved to doing the previewing through NDI. So, there are thousands of NLE edits being done every day now. All in AWS or Azure, yep. Which is all being done with basically our NDI out plugins.
Super.
And you probably could choose every major network in the US, and they would fall into that. There might be one or two that aren't, but the majority are.
Now let's talk about NDI production systems. Now, I don't want you to go into your NewTek specific stuff because we're going to have Will Waters on next week, and he's going to go into that stuff. But I really want to talk about, a switcher was a switcher. A TriCaster was a great switcher ahead of its time, and other people had them. But NDI has opened up feature sets that I didn't think anyone 5 years ago imagined was going to be in their switcher. And now they're just asking for more and more and more and more and more. So a great example of that, and we're going to go into it a little bit later in the show, is how, we're having to integrate things like Zoom calls and Teams into a switcher. But I want to save that for the future portion. For now, I just want you to talk about the world of NDI production systems, where you see them going, especially in the world of broadcast, where I know they're making headway.
Yes. So, there's lots of tiers of broadcast, out there. Lots of people are in broadcast. What I think should be clear is that even at high-end broadcast now, NDI is making a clear difference, and that there's probably, certainly there's a bunch of primetime shows that are going on to TV today that are being done with NDI either completely or in part. You wouldn't know it, but there's certainly a lot of the larger broadcasters are already running all NDI systems. That is quite remarkable in itself. I think that one of the things that NDI has done very well, and where you're seeing huge traction for, is as a lot of these systems are moved into the cloud, because NDI can work well in the cloud. You're seeing a huge amount of people now doing the production in the cloud, and then so they will move the video sources into the cloud using something like SRT or the BirdDog product or Sienna or some of those products, but then it's all NDI in the cloud. And that has become incredibly common, and obviously in a COVID year, that has become kind of the number one area of interest, really. So that's been interesting.
And you jumped ahead, so I'm going to backtrack a little bit, because we were going to talk about software with BirdDog and New Blue, but let's just jump right into the cloud, because you're really there. And the pandemic forced things to happen that people weren't sure when those technology was going to come about. We've been working on this. We've been talking about this, me and you, for years, how IP was coming. And what I like to compare this to was back in the early 2000s, the factories that made tape got wiped out in Japan. I can't remember if it was a typhoon or an earthquake or a fire, but they got wiped out, and all of a sudden we got forced as an industry to move from tape to digital. And I think what this pandemic forced us to do was that jump to IP. Because the bottom line was we had to make it work. The shows had to go on. And what I think is very interesting is, just as you talked about hardware engineers versus software engineers, what we've seen on video production at every level, schools, church, network, broadcast sports, is the older engineers, who I think were a lot of the bottleneck on us getting NDI into facilities, were kind of pushed aside. As the young IT buck said, I got this thing, I could do this with IP, I could do it with NDI, we can get this show going, we could piece together these different technologies that are IP based, and we could produce these television shows. And the shows have been produced. Unfortunately or fortunately, I will say that I think probably the quality of the show we're doing today is better than a lot of things you see on network TV, because we're really getting good at this and they're still trying to figure it out. But I really want to talk about how the cloud and remote and NDI really come together, because the bottom line is people are producing videos, and it's not with 30 people in a studio anymore. People are spread out all over the globe producing videos. That's post-production, pre-production, and live shows and can shows. It's more than a revolution. It's like we had to just peel the Band-Aid off, in one fell swoop and scream. Yes. And here we are. So talk about, you've got to be proud about that, because it wouldn't have been possible without what you guys did.
Absolutely. So I'm going to say maybe something controversial here, because I think cloud is important. Let me just be clear, cloud is important, but cloud to me is just a computer running somewhere else. And the real transformative thing for our industry is the move to software, not the move to cloud. The move to cloud is just enabled by the move to software, but it's the move to software that was the big thing. And so, but I think that you raised what is fundamentally a very good point, and something that I've actually written a few articles on, which is that, it is something that has been very clear, is that going into this pandemic, the view of the world in broadcast towards, say, fail safety or one's acceptance of risk was that you solved it by having two systems instead of one, and you would rely on the increased benefit of hardware. There was this perception that pure hardware solutions are more reliable than software solutions. And what's happened is the pandemic has actually shown that is not a scalable approach. It doesn't work. Yep. Because they've got all these redundant systems all over this country that nobody can go and use. What was far more important was software, which you can move around with you and you can duplicate, and that is what gave us the reliance we need. And so I do think that there has become an increased acceptance of the fact that the flexibility of software is ultimately what's going to win out here. And I do think that our industry has jumped forwards 5 years as a result of this pandemic, which I think is a very positive thing.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I love your way of doing that. I'm going to tell people now that the cloud is just a way to run software on someone else's computer. That could be bigger, better, more storage, whatever, but it's just a better way to run software when you can't do it locally. And I really think the hybrid approach is what really we're settling into. There's some local stuff that's on the network. There's some stuff on my computer that I'm running now. And of course, there's a cloud. When you bring that all together, the flexibility and workflows that gets created is tremendous. And right now, we're just trying to make it work. I look at like when we have an NAB show together again, call it a year from now, what they're talking about. I think one of the things people are going to really talk about is in 2020, under the pandemic, we got all this stuff to work. 2021, we're going to make it look as good as it used to look before. And that's why I think we're still going to see a lot of investment here. And I think a lot of people who are getting their first look at this, their first investment this, are all going to be saying, now how can I make it better? And the beauty about NDI and software is you can scale it. You don't have to rip everything out like you used to every time you wanted new stuff. You could add one little component and dramatically increase the quality of your production, but you're not ripping everything out. And that to me is amazing.
Yes, and by the way, this goes true of software too, because I think that one of the big benefits of a software-based approach is that if you are a TV station, you can start today on-prem running software, knowing that this is a workflow that will be scalable into the cloud in the future, or to remote if you want to. So if you buy into this view that software is the future, then where you run it in the future is open to you. So you open up all the options to doing it. And that is why these software-based approaches, which are the ones that both as a company, but with NDI that we just see as the key, are so critical. And, I truly believe that they've just got to be the right direction here.
So now when the pandemic forces us to jump 5 years ahead to the future, what kind of pressure does that put on you now? Because now something you were cooking for 2030, you got to deliver in 2025, my friend. You better get to work.
Oh, that's not a problem. It makes it more fun, doesn't it? I think that we're going to see, and I try not to talk too much about the future, but I think it is, I think that some of this is clearly things that are not hard to guess. I mean, I think increasingly we're in a connected world, and where we as a company and we with NDI need to make it so that anybody can work anywhere with anyone else, and that's got to be easy, which it is not today. And we've got to make that easier. We've got to make it work better on mobile. We've got to support more platforms. We've got to make it so that we integrate into more software. And if we do those things, the rest is going to come together on its own. I have, every year after like NDI 4.5, I get into this kind of zone for about a month where I think, gosh, we've solved the big problems. It's just an IP protocol, right? How much more innovation can we put into this? And by the way, I feel the same about the products we make. And normally about a month in, I've got all these ideas about that get me really excited about the directions that we can go. And I feel, I feel very much that way about NDI today. I feel that we are just getting started, and I don't think the next version needs to be or should be just a little iteration on the last one. We aren't about that. We want to do something that leaves everybody who kind of surprised and excited about it. And I very much see that happening with NDI. I very much see that with our product lines too. So I'm as excited about what I'm doing now, and maybe more so than I was last year. And if we've got to accelerate our timetable by 5 years, that's great.
Cool. One of the things
gives us more of a challenge
with the future that I want to talk about is one of the ways you said the future happened now is there's this little outfit company called Zoom that never dreamed that 100 million people would be using them at the same time, and Microsoft Teams was something they were having a hard time getting people to adapt to, and Google had their Google Meets, which no one was using, but were kind of flat. Now all this other stuff has happened, and I will tell you that, I think it's amazing how we've allowed remote work. Let's not talk about production, but remote work through these tools. But the truth of the matter is we're all getting fatigued. Why? Because staring at the Brady Bunch boxes just doesn't work. And I think what NDI and NewTek is going to allow us to do, and you've hinted at this with the TC2E, and we have Will Waters coming on next week, so he's going to talk more about that, and he'll go into the new products that are out there. But what's really incredible to me is we're going to be able to kind of fuse that AV conference technology with remote work with what I feel is production quality. So just like what we're doing here and bringing stuff in, this is a little more interesting than just a talking head. And I think the workforce has to catch up to that. We've got to be able to do sales conferences and virtual NAB shows and even teaching for kids where people are going to want to pay attention, and you get so fatigued just staring at those screens. So I'd just like you to talk about where in the future you see that whole merging of AV, conferencing, NDI, and video production.
Oh, so first of all, I think you're completely right, and I think that the world of video is going to grow dramatically. I think that so if you look to Asia, so there were some very interesting trends that are happening in Asia that I think we should all take a close look at. So I'm calling it V-commerce. The idea that you can start to replace stores with an online interactive video experience, that is now huge in Asia.
Wow.
And when you think about it, things like that are going to take off and are going to transform the society literally. And I think that even there, the corona this year has accelerated a lot of the move to that, because now we all realize we don't need to walk into a store. Now there are certain things that we might still feel we need to walk into a store to buy, like shoes and clothes. They need to fit right and so on, and it's a bit of a pain to do over Amazon. But once we can have one-on-one experiences through conferencing, and it's going to happen. Look, I mean, I don't know how many people noticed this, but there was Google announced a few probably about a month ago that they were going to move YouTube more towards a QSV style channel. Now you know why, which is they get this. They get that the storefront of the future is going to be one that's done over video, and that's what they're really going after. And that's just one example, and there's going to be so many more. The meetings are going to change. As a company, look, we're a company. We have 700-ish people at the company. From one day to the next, we need to start to keep them all engaged. We have to do town halls. Something that I've actually been a long proponent for is doing online sales demos. I personally don't like going out and learning about something, so if I can watch and learn about it online, I do. And I don't know if people have been very perceptive. I since long before the acquisition have been pushing this online demos on the NewTek
Yep.
you know, on the NewTek website. You know why now, because
Yep.
it was just so clear that this is where it's all going to go. And it's funny, I could never get, the company were just tired of hearing me talk about this, and, you know, wondered why I just wouldn't let it go. Hopefully now they see the direction a bit better.
You have always been a visionary, and you know we're jumping on that vision. That's why we're doing this Ndi November. We really thought it's an important technology. We've talked about, you know, regular streaming and stuff, but we thought we had to focus the industry back on where the future's going. You know, that old line of, you know, don't go where the puck is, go where the puck's going to be. I love hockey, so I use hockey all the time. So I just want to, if we get on the side, I want to talk about what we have planned for the future of our Ndi November schedule. So like I said, we have Will Waters coming on November 11th. He's going to talk about your stuff, if we can get the sidebar going. Cool. Excellent, guys. Thank you. And then we have on the 3rd, we have Dan Miall coming in from Australia from BirdDog, and he's going to talk to us about the gear that he's got. We've got Gregor Jones from Panasonic, and then we've got Shane from Telestream, and we're just going to talk about NDI workflows with their products, and that's the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And yeah, I'm a busy guy. Then on the 3rd, again, we have Epiphan coming in. Will Waters on the is the 4th, and Paul Richards on the 5th. I want to mention also that as part of this, we're doing a win-a-free NDI webcam as kind of get people to sign up and stuff like that. But Dr. Cross, I got to thank you because you made this technology possible, and it has been, I love the relationship we have, that you've given me sneak peeks of stuff. I know on camera there's things you can't say, and sometimes we'll sit in a room, you'll tell me a little bit more, and I miss that because I would usually come to your guys' holiday party. I'm going to miss that a lot this year. But
Me too.
I just want to give you the floor. It's open. You know, we ran, of course, because you're on the show, 30 minutes, forget about it. We're at 45 plus. But take it away. Whatever you want to talk about to end the show, it's yours.
You know, first of all, I don't think NDI was necessarily our creation. I mean, I think we were the spark that maybe helped it take off, but I think that the industry as a whole adopted it. And you know, one of the greatest things about this is, quite frankly, that we see people doing things that we never expected, and often don't even discover until, you know, long after they've happened. So, you know, if you watch broadcast TV today, you're probably seeing a lot of shows that are NDI and don't know it. You know, when you go into Times Square, I can tell you some of those billboards are running NDI now. I mean, it's been unbelievable, but this wasn't us. This was you. This was the customers. This was the vendors that did great stuff with it. You've got, you know, you've got a bunch of vendors here who have done as much and to innovate and create, you know, things with NDI as we did. And I think that it's just really cool to be a part of this. I'm proud of what we all have created. I'm proud of working with video guys who also understood and saw this and helped make it happen in the industry. And that you know, that's what makes my job fun and worthwhile. Well, it really is. More than anything else.
We thank you. Thank you so much for being on the show. I know your time is valuable, and I want you making more good stuff from us. So I'm going to say goodbye to you, and thank you very much. And guys, if we could pull up the slide that's on my screen now by Dr. Cross. This is the schedule we have. My slide was a little off, so I'm going to run through that schedule again of Ndi November Webinars. On the 3rd, we have Dan Miall from BirdDog. On the 4th, we have Gregor Jones from Panasonic. On the 5th, we have Shane from Telestream. The 10th, we have George from Epiphan. The 11th, Will Waters from NewTek. And then on the 12th, Paul Richards from PTZOptics is coming in. He's going to do that giveaway. So I want to thank everyone for being on the show today. You know, we felt NDI was so important. We didn't want to dedicate a show to it. We want to dedicate a month to it. We're going to compact 6 shows, 7 shows in a short period of time to really bring in the people that Dr. Cross, as he mentioned, have made this all possible. His vendor partners who are doing all that work. We're proud to be a part of it, but really, we're just the guys who sell it and explain the technology to you. It's these geniuses in back rooms and offices, the engineers, who my hat's off, who I just got to thank for all the great work you did. So I'm going to sign off the show for today. This was Gary from Video Guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, and watch all these shows. We'll still be doing our regular Tuesday shows at 3 p.m., but all these other shows are going to be coming at you as we can get the guests in. So this is Gary from Video Guys. Peace.
Video Guys is available Monday through Friday. Give us a call at 1-800-323-2325. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Instagram to stay connected with all of our updates. And you can like us on Facebook. Keep an eye out for our live videos, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.